310 days, cosmonaut Sergei Krikalyov was marooned in space. As the Soviet Union and the communist system unraveled 300 miles below him, Krikalyov remained exiled in orbit, stranded by the tumultuous events on Earth, left behind as the last Soviet citizen.
Про себя мы не беспокоились, мы были, находясь на борту, мы были только наблюдателями. Во многие вещи просто не могли оказать влияние на ход процесса, но за людей, которые там на земле, мы боялись, потому что если бы начались беспорядки, естественно, мы опасались за свои семьи, за своих друзей и просто за людей, которых мы даже не знаем. Но если бы в Москве начались военные действия, то, конечно, это было бы ужасно.
But as he circled helplessly over his collapsing nation for 10 months, Sergei Krikalyov was also struggling to maintain one last vital element of national self-esteem, the 30-year epic of Soviet space. Tonight, Arena looks at the last hero of Soviet space and at the rise and fall of Soviet space culture.
After entering an orbit close to the moon and becoming its man-made satellite, the automatic station transmitted to Earth the melody of the party anthem, the International. And delegates to the 23rd Party Congress heard it.
For 3 decades, as communism claimed its most spectacular victories in space, the nation's soul was stirred by its cosmic heroes.
Незамечательных этих мир не забудет побед. Звездной дорогой в ракете мчится земной человек. Время герою велело ринуться в синюю тьму. Солнце, луна и Венера путь освещают ему.
Proud we say, glory to those cosmonauts who have raised to the skies the prestige of the Soviet Union, its Communist Party, and all the Soviet people. The heroes of labor salute the heroes of space.
Along with promises of communism in 20 years, with corn plantations, with Cuba, the island of liberty, space was one of the pinnacles in the positive Soviet mentality of that age. And I think that actually it was the main thing. It was the spine of the whole Soviet-type communism enthusiasm. Since this was a real achievement, not a fake thing like in the Brezhnev's time, but a really strong and impressive achievement, people believed in it.
The fact that only 12 years after the war ended, we were the first to be out there with Sputnik 1 was a way of saying, you see what socialism can do, you see what our system can do, we are going to overtake you. We are going to prove that ours is the best life.
The men of this new profession, the astronauts, have to go through strenuous training for their journeys to the stars.
Three decades later, Soviet space has lost its novelty and its starry status. Cosmic heroes have become space plumbers, like engineer Sergei Krikalyov. When Krikalyov prepared for his mission in the spring of 1991, the Soviet Union was in turmoil. The 67th Soviet citizen to go into space attracted little attention from a hard-pressed population more concerned with the spiralling price of sausages. And by now, Soviet space was for sale to all comers.
Soviets have a lot of experience in sending people into space. And I have every confidence in the people who have made the technology and also in the crew, my crew that I'm flying with.
Krikalyov lifted off with the first British astronaut, Helen Sharman, for her 8-day trip into space.
Sergei was immensely helpful. He'd flown before, so he's experienced, and partly because of that, partly because of his character, if things are going wrong, if things are going tough going, yes, Sergei's much more, he's laid back. But I think they typically choose cosmonauts who are laid back. They don't want people to get into a flap who panic about things.
Krikalyov was scheduled to spend 5 months in space. Events on Earth were to upset his plans.
As I can recall those 60s memories, the cosmonauts were treated exactly like pop stars. In the Soviet Union at that time, it was considered that worshipping, say, a film star or a pop singer was not very good because their contribution to the society was not as important. And they always ridiculed those idolizing of Western artists like Elvis Presley or Marilyn Monroe or somebody. Unlike movie stars, the cosmonauts were considered to be, the right persons to worship and idolize, and they were everywhere: posters, badges, watches.
Звезды становятся ближе, но путь бесконечен. Снова сквозь тернии к звездам летят корабли. Пусть повезет всем живущим предчувствием встречи, людям, живущим единственной правдой любви.
During our docking, one of our antennas was giving us a misreading of the angle of the approach of our spacecraft towards the space station and also the distance. Sergei noticed it first just by looking out of the window. And by looking out of the window, he said, "This doesn't feel right." We all had to very much operate as a team together. And knowing that one mistake by any one of us would jeopardize not only our lives, but also the lives of the cosmonauts who were already on board the station. So it was a bit of a strange time. I mean, I felt laid back, and yet the doctors had told me that my heartbeat had gone up to 120 beats a minute. So I must have been feeling pretty uptight in myself, knowing that, it's almost now or never. I mean, if you miss the space station by a mile, okay, you go round again and have another go. But if you miss by 10 centimetres, then you're going to blast a hole in it. You may well blast a hole in yourselves, and you most likely won't make it back to Earth. Sergei, by looking out of the window and by looking at what computer information was correct, was able to guide us in. I mean, he always said that when he got into the space station, he felt like he was going home.
Сколько я себя помню, я уже всегда знал о космонавтике. Для многих из них это было уже на их глазах, когда обсуждался вопрос о возможности полета в космос, потом, наконец, начали летать спутники, потом люди. А сколько я себя помню, я уже родился после запуска спутника.
The first swallow in outer space. Collective farms, a glacier, roads, mountains, and thousands of babies were named after him. He was kissed by Gina Lollobrigida and lunched by the Queen of England. Harold Macmillan called him a jolly good chap. Leaving America stunned by his achievement, Gagarin was hailed at home as the best living advertisement for the Soviet system.
Gagarin, a young communist, who could well be a grandson of those who accomplished the October Revolution, personified that revolution. The Gagarin orbit around the Earth brought people closer together. In it, they saw their tomorrow. He wore the highest decorations of many countries. The government of fighting Vietnam made him hero of labor. In Liberia, he was decorated with the Great Star of Africa. But there were other, more modest perhaps, but no less prized awards. The workers of Manchester presented him with the Foundryman's Union Medal. He was a citizen of the planet when he was 27, only 27. A car that drove him in Britain had Yuri Gagarin 1 on its license plate.
Spaceflight made all that was before bigger, like amplifier. Gagarin was very typical Russian man, and all the world liked him. He was not something special. He was typical Russian pilot, young, brave, good-looking, simple, very good in communication, and it was only journalist trick to make from him angel, and now I saw some articles that he was devil, but he was a good friend.
Gagarin was quintessentially Russian. No one would say that this was not a Russian. The face was Russian. The comportment was Russian. The smile was Russian. The blue eyes, the color of the hair. This was a typically, perfectly Russian man. A man who was in control of himself, who was very optimistic in his outlook on life, who was a positive figure, but not a robot. Far from it. Someone with character. But a very, how should I put this? He was charged with positive electronic particles. He was all positive.
From icon painters to popular composers, Soviet artists were inspired by Gagarin. The traditional icon artists of Paliech reinterpreted Gagarin's flight with religious fervor. And the constellation of Gagarin, a patriotic song cycle, won lavish state awards.
Живет дни надежд и тревог, песни рассвета в сердцах у нас, запевала звездных дорог, комсомолец небесных трасс. Пылает небосвод зарей гагаринской весны, и продолжается полет в бессмертном подвиге страны.
Yes, we had several very popular patriotic songs about our victories in space. I think one of them was even written by Dmitry Shostakovich. Родина слышит, Родина знает. The motherland knows how her son is flying in orbit. So, and this was really a very beautiful song.
Я этого не видел, не помню. Мне тогда было 3 года, когда еще даже 3 лет не было, когда Гагарин полетел в космос. Но мне потом много рассказывали о тех стихийных демонстрациях, которые возникли после объявления о полете Гагарина. Люди перестали работать, люди выходили на улицу. В общем, это было действительно народное ликование и торжество. То есть была гордость из-за Гагарина, из-за тех людей, которые сделали это возможным.
Он сказал: поехали, он взмахнул рукой, словно вдоль по питерской пронесся над землей. Словно вдоль по питерской пронесся над землей.
Мы считаем своим долгом возложить цветы человеку, который первым полетел в космос во всем мире.
А жена знает?
Знает.
Ну и как?
Что как, плачет?
Понятно, понятно.
А вообще-то я везучий, а ты? Я тоже.
Значит, все будет в порядке. 90 минут, один оборот, виток и обратно. 10 минут на парашют. Ой, время-то как летит. Ну, ступай спать. Надежда прогрессивного человечества.
А вы?
Я еще похожу.
Even 10 years later, cinema audiences were still being thrilled by the widescreen recreation of Gagarin's flight. The feature film, The Taming of Fire, offers some adjustments to the documentary record.
Attention, 60 seconds countdown. Zarya 1, I'm Kedr, got you. 60 seconds countdown.
Внимание! Минутная готовность.
Есть. Есть.
Минутная готовность.
Минутная готовность принята.
Ключ на старт.
Есть ключ на старт.
Ключ на старт. Ключ на старт. Есть старт. Протяжка 1. Есть протяжка.
Продувка.
Ключ на дренаж.
Кедр.
Я Заря 1. Зажигание.
Зажигание.
Понял вас. Зажигание.
Есть предварительное. Промежуточное. Желаю вам доброго полета.
Good luck.
Слышишь меня? Счастливо тебе!
Поехали!
Слушай, рабочий, война началася, бросай свое дело, поход собирайся. Смело мы в бой пойдем за власть советов и как один умрем в борьбе за это.
Yuri Gagarin's flight to space was the last splash of Soviet communism enthusiasm. I mean, after that, there was nothing really to write home about. The great victory in Czechoslovakia, or the stupid Olympic Games in Moscow 1980, or, Elton John playing near Red Square, you know, nothing really special. So Yuri Gagarin, I think, was the last true hero of communism and the last true hero of the Soviet Union.
A cinema commercial of the late 60s suggests how quickly the miraculous novelty of space was coming down to earth for Soviet audiences.
Change to Laika.
Well, of course, throughout the 70s, the people here in this country, they were losing their beliefs and enthusiasm and everything, including all these spaceship heroics. I mean, we had all those flights, and probably the most famous of them was actually this Soyuz Apollo flight with the Americans.
Glad to see you. Here.
I remember it made cigarettes, Soyuz Apollo. This was quite a pleasant thing because, of course, it was all about détente and like part-time finishing of the Cold War and so on. But there was no big excitement about it, you know, people were not crying in the streets, and so it was already very much indifferent.
Outer space at your home. The screen is in one of Moscow's streets. Live transmission. People stop to look at it. Remember the noisy triumph of cosmonautics at the very beginning? But now, it is a regular matter. Nobody looks into the night sky to detect a star made by human hands as they did 30 years ago, when the first satellite or Sputnik was launched.
Soon, even the television space spectaculars had a routine feel.
But sometimes we have a real holiday. The most unforgettable, of course, is a bath in outer space.
For Sergei Krikalyov and the cosmonauts of the 1990s, space is a job founded on years of hard training and routines learnt in the full-scale mock-up of the Mir Space Station. The humdrum miracles of life in space for Krikalyov and his colleagues on Mir were recorded by a couple of professional video cameras left behind by a passing Japanese cosmonaut. Over the months, Krikalyov found himself playing host to a sequence of visiting cosmonauts, while his engineering skills kept him on permanent call, servicing the whims of the aging space station. Space may have lost its public glamour in the 1990s, but the experience of the cosmos has continued to stir the imaginations of successive generations of cosmonauts.
В каждую свободную минуту мы старались смотреть на Землю. И, тем не менее, это невозможно осмотреть всю Землю и запомнить всю Землю. Все-таки это не такой вот маленький глобус. Можно всматриваться в детали и узнавать какие-то места, на которых ты бывал, которые тебе нравятся, где ты, о которых ты, может быть, читал или слышал. И вот смотреть на эти места очень интересно. И очень красиво, поэтому большую часть времени мы тратили, наверное, глядя на Землю.
Really, all we wanted to do was to be together, to look out of one of the windows and talk about what we could see. And quite often we'd go back to bed whenever we felt tired. We'd go back in ones and twos and dribs and drabs. But quite often me and Sergei would be the two left. We'd go down to the very end of one of the modules. It's the module where they do all their spacewalks from. And so the two spacewalk suits, and huge suits, and they're huddled inside the end of this module. And me and Sergei would get down the end of here, because there are windows opposite each other. So whichever way the space station is pointing, there's always one window that you can look out and see the Earth. And we'd just float next to this window, and sometimes not even say anything to each other.
small boy and I started to dream about flying. I was flying maybe for 30 years, just in my dreams, almost every night. It was my childhood, and in the mountains, it is extremely close to space, you know, the feeling, looking into the skies and at night, and all the sky is just, you know, coming to you. It seemed to me like that, or I am going closer to the stars. It is easier for me to take a pencil and a sheet of paper and to make a sketch than to speak too much about it.
My idea, it is a Columbus, 1, 2, 3, but I want to do at this surface our emblem, Association of Space Explorers.
Alexei Leonov was the first man to walk in space. He's also a passionate painter.
Я вначале был художником, потом стал космонавтом, а потом уже космическим художником. Я представлял, что это такое, в общем, но не мог представить, как это голубая земля и черное небо. И днем солнце светит и яркие звезды. У меня была мечта сделать карту именно с цветовым обозначением реальным, снятым оттуда из космоса. Я очень много думал, почему Черное море есть Черное море. Ведь оно действительно Черное море. Почему Балтийское, Свинцовое, Серое? Значит, кто-то оттуда видел, и кто-то об этом сказал первый. Black Sea, Черное море. Действительно черное.
I would say that many of cosmonauts and astronauts also, so far, they have such a feeling and a wish to share with the ideas, with the ways of thinking, and especially after my first flight, when my philosophy has been changed quite deeply. That is why my ideas in my drawings are connected with people, sometimes an adventure, sometimes just a mood of a man flying over the earth, watching and thinking.
The space art, the same as the space exploration. I think the interest to it, it is the interest to our future, to the future of the mankind. It is the mirror of the space exploration, if I can do it good.
Until the collapse of communism, Andrei Sokolov was the official artist of Soviet space. For more than 25 years, he's pursued his passion for painting space with unique persistence and ingenuity.
I understand that I would never fly to the space. I am too big and too old. So I send my sketches there. For example, this. It is the paintings what I make using this sketch. The cosmonauts take it in space. It is not heavy. They can put it so in the pocket. And I paint as I think it might look. And then they make their remarks. Это, в общем, подмалевок, то есть самое начало, но как раз я хотел сначала тебя и услышать твое мнение. Видишь, это все будет потом смещаться. Вот эскиз, который ты привез, вот насколько он соответствует действительности?
Это просто великолепно. Я просто знаю, что вот такие картины очень бывают часто.
Именно против солнца.
Anatoly Artsebarsky flew with Sergei Krikalyov early in his mission. Like scores of other Soviet cosmonauts, he recorded his comments on Sokolov's paintings in space.
Горизонту вот, ну вот такой вот эффект, видишь, вот блечок какой-то в прибойной линии, он возможен?
Да, это есть. Причем это же статика, а динамика,
понятно.
она отсвечивает. Она
Причем это длится какие-то, в общем-то, секунды, вот это положение, потом этот блик ушел в сторону.
Мы же проходим очень быстро, да.
Да.
Планета голубая, и все одна родная, хоть часть души оставлена вдали, края покинув звездные, вернемся и морозные.
Yuri Romanenko learned to play the guitar in space and composed this song while on the Mir station. Other cosmonauts have found the mix of art and science more elusive.
У нас есть на борту библиотека, есть книги. Некоторые из этих книг я уже читал когда-то раньше на Земле, но даже те, которые, может быть, и интересны, и там находятся, было жалко на это тратить времени. Я знал, что я на Земле вот могу сесть и посчитать, но на Земле я не смогу выглянуть в окошко и увидеть другие страны, другие районы. Что касается музыки, то музыка для нас была, наверное, правильно сказать, фоном. Я не отношусь к знатокам или к особенным любителям музыки. Многие из них разбираются и в произведениях, и в направлениях музыки, и в авторах, которые пишут эту музыку. К сожалению, я себя к таким не отношу. Но музыка у нас звучала очень часто, и во время нашей работы, и во время занятий спортом всегда у нас играла музыка, потому что это помогало несколько нас, поднимало настроение. И заключительную часть полета у нас музыка нас будила.
First of all, I tried to have in space classical music. But classical music, it is a very bad idea because you should hear the music or work. And I changed my tapes and I really had in space big bands. Miller was very good background for working.
Georgi Grechko also took with him into space less soothing music. A tape of the Soviet Union's most popular and most seditious songwriter, Vladimir Vysotsky.
Здесь вам не равнина, здесь климат иной, идут лавины одна за одной, и здесь за камнепадом ревет камнепад.
Songs of Vysotsky was spirit, how to behave in bad situation.
И можно свернуть, обрыв обогнуть, но мы выбираем трудный путь, опасный, как военная тропа.
After my flight, I gave this tape to Vysotsky with thank you for your songs.
Внизу не встретишь, как ни тянись, за всю свою счастливую жизнь, десятой доли таких красот и чудес.
In space, when we are weak, your songs made us strong.
I was very much afraid. Well, all the time. Well, I had insomnia. I couldn't sleep at all. I couldn't sleep. Well, a minute. I lost just 6 kilograms of weight. I didn't forget about my husband being in orbit for a minute. I could sit in this mission control center, and I could hear everything my husband was speaking. And at some moment, suddenly, he couldn't finish the sentence. He started speaking, and suddenly he stopped, and I could hear him any longer. And then I decided that that was all. They perished. I was sitting there and waiting when people will come and tell me that my husband died. Well, and suddenly somebody came and said, well, congratulations, your husband has landed. I say, no, it's not true. I could hear myself that he didn't finish the sentence. I said, it's true. He has come back. And then I suddenly believed. I believed that my husband has returned. And I started crying at that moment.
I think the hardest part was actually saying goodbye. And gradually we got further from the station. But while we were still in radio contact, Sergei played the electric keyboards a little bit, a little tune that we got to know that he liked playing while he was up there. And I can still remember the same beat, dum, dum, da, dum, that he used to play. And as we drifted further and further away, eventually we couldn't even hear each other properly because of the crackliness of the radio waves. And then they decided that they said, we'd like to say goodbye now, we can't hear you properly, but we'll play you something to remember us by. And they put on that cassette and they played Tanita Tikaram, The World Outside Your Window.
A world outside your window, a world outside your window isn't free. Oh, and tell me if you want to catch that feeling of redemption, that feeling of redemption, don't do much for me.
I know one Russian astronaut who had Bible in flight. His flight was very long, and he read Bible from first page till the end.
Georgi Grechko's own choice of space literature was shorter.
Graham Greene, our man in Havana, you should have some sample how somebody else behave in this situation. Situation like Mission Impossible. And not get out of this situation, but get out with destiny and with humor. And in this book, it was sample how to do it for me.
In the 4th month of his flight, within sight of the end of his scheduled mission, Sergei Krikalyov was suddenly confronted with the prospect of his own Mission Impossible.
And now news flash. According to the Article 1277 of the USSR Constitution, Vice President of the USSR Gennady Yanayev took office from Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev because Gorbachev is unable to perform his presidential duties for health reasons.
С утра, в тот день, когда это случилось, в первом же сеансе связи сказали, что сейчас мы передадим вам важное сообщение. Конечно, для нас это была большая неожиданность. И не очень даже поняли, что произошло сначала, потому что все-таки сеанс связи достаточно короткий. Нам дали какую-то порцию информации, и мы начали дальше додумывать, что же все-таки это происходит, для того, чтобы вот с помощью коротких отрывочных кусков, той информации, которая к нам приходила на борт, пытались воссоздать какую-то более или менее цельную картину.
Насколько я понимаю, страха у них не было, и тем более, что изменить ситуацию они же никак не могли. То есть оставалось только принимать информацию и делать какие-то выводы со временем, что это и как.
Ну, естественно, мы, обсуждая это, пытались понять, как пойдет развитие космонавтики в том случае, если вот этот путч, который произошел, одержит верх, потому что мы не понимали, естественно, ни расстановки сил. Многие на Земле-то ее не понимали, а нам, получая обрывочные сведения, было тем труднее этого создать.
With the collapse of the coup in Moscow, Sergei Krikalyov was presented with a dismaying new challenge. Political squabbling in the fragmenting Soviet Union and a cash crisis dictated a bleak message from Mission Control. Instead of coming home soon, cosmonaut Krikalyov was asked to stay in space until further notice.
Поскольку когда со мной обсуждался вопрос, могу ли я летать еще, мне прежде всего следовало задать этот вопрос самому себе. Хватит ли у меня сил рассчитать силы на эту более длинную дистанцию для того, чтобы успешно завершить программу И, ну, естественно, в какой-то момент были и сомнения, что их хватит.
Sergei would often talk about, well, his family. He had a lovely young wife, still has a lovely young wife, and a little girl who was 9 months old when we actually launched into space. And you know, he'd often talk about that too. It's something that had become quite important in his life, because the first time he flew, he wasn't married. And he really got to know his wife because she worked in mission control. He got to know her while he was in space the first time just by talking to her on the radio link. And this second time, he was not only married to her, but they had a little girl as well. And so that was the main difference for him.
Я была очень расстроена, потому что к тому моменту уже прошло больше половины его полета, который был вначале запланирован. И ну, у меня где-то в душе было вот-вот, еще немножечко, и он уже вернется. И тут мне сообщают, что он будет летать еще 5 месяцев. Это было очень тяжело, конечно. Официально нам планировалось раз в 2 недели, около часа. У нас было телевидение. Я пыталась не говорить о каких-то неприятных вещах, потому что им и так тяжело, в общем-то, трудно. И, насколько я поняла, Сергей тоже то же самое так же себя вел. Все время говорили, что у них все хорошо, все прекрасно, что работа идет нормально. И поэтому понять до конца, что там происходит, в душе у человека очень тяжело. Можно только догадываться как-то.
Я знал, ну, насколько трудно каждый день, каждую неделю, месяц находиться в космосе. И такое на 6 месяцев продление полета, конечно, было очень трудной задачей. Но я оценил свои силы, что я смогу это сделать. И, ну, как показал опыт, в общем-то, сил хватило до конца полета.
At the end of 1991, as the Soviet Union ceased to exist, aboard the Mir Space Station, the last Soviet citizen received a visitor from the West. Franz Fiebok became the first Austrian in space, gratefully fired into orbit by a bankrupt Russian space program desperate for his $12 million launch fee. Along with him came a newly independent Kazakh. Krikalyov was also joined by a post-communist fellow Russian. Mission Control provided the welcoming soundtrack free of charge. For 30 years, Star City has been the heart of cosmonaut training. This used to be one of the most prestigious and secret places in the Soviet Union. General Pyotr Klimuk is the commander of Star City. These days, he's also in the business of attracting vital hard currency from overseas.
И находимся сейчас на жилой территории звездного городка. Впереди видна гостиница, в которой живут астронавты и космонавты иностранных государств, когда приезжают сюда в звездный городок для того, чтобы получить подготовку.
Yuri Gagarin's study in Star City is preserved as a shrine, frozen in time at the moment of his death 25 years ago. But Gagarin would surely be bewildered by the latest recruits for cosmonaut training at Star City. city made its own promotional video to record the first group of American tourists. For around $5,000 each, some of capitalism's bolder spirits were invited to sample the thrills and spills of Soviet space training.
Красивый сувенир. Далее, значит, мешок со священной землей нашего Байконура, где впервые стартовал космический корабль в звездные дали. Амулеты, которые, значит, нам дали с собой в дорогу наши деды.
А флаг я вижу, за вашей спиной там очень много флажков, и в том
Да-да.
числе наш флаг
Вот там
республики.
наш как раз, мы сразу флаг повесили свой, здесь интернациональный экипаж получился, и очень хорошо так.
The Gagarin Party, a rave in Moscow's Space Museum, amid the retired satellites and pioneering hardware of the heroic era, now recycled as disco props.
There was a group of kids from St. Petersburg who were doing rave parties at the Petersburg Planetarium. So they were already a bit crazy about space and science fiction and so on. And they've done this party. It was absolutely brilliant, and I also think that it was very good to name it Gagarin Party after Gagarin. Because, you know, right now we have this very boring Americanization of our culture, and of course those American vibes, they are stronger than our own vibes, and you know, now it's those boring soft drinks and fast food and you know, and junk clothes everywhere, and we are sort of losing our national identity and pride and everything else. And I think this is quite inevitable, but at the same time, it's awfully pleasant to say one day, look, American guys, here's Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, the first man in space, the man who managed to destroy the whole American dream overnight. There was one very well-known cosmonaut named Grechko. I just saw him sitting there drinking champagne in huge quantities with a happy smile on his face. I think the cosmonauts were actually having a good time, but they didn't dance, unfortunately. They were just drinking. You know, those cosmonauts, they now feel so neglected. They're so happy if someone calls them for a party or anything.
In Babylon, 2,000 years ago, on the clay tables was wrote. Now the younger man is so awful that in some decades all the world will go to hell with this younger man, But now, not the case. 2,000 years and the world is alive. And it was a sign for me not punish this young man. I tried to understand them. I guess that Gagarin would not like this, because of course it's very strange. The space equipment was made by us, and we install in this equipment not only electronic devices, but our body, our brain, our soul, and this big sound of this discotheque and some maybe a light drunk young men and girls. Of course, it was very strange mixture, but it is their time, not ours.
Какой был самый серьезный аргумент для тебя, Сереж?
Ну, самый серьезный аргумент, наверное, экономический, потому что такой вариант позволял сэкономить средства на корабль фактически. Хотя для меня, конечно, этот вариант тяжелый и, наверное, не полезный для здоровья, но он экономил большие средства, а в это время, сейчас, когда в стране достаточно тяжело, наверное, это возможность экономить такая, она выходит, наверное, на первый план.
Only a few weeks after the Gagarin party, the Space Museum has received a further assault on its heroic image. Now the Museum of Space Achievements has a new role. It has become a used car lot for imported Western cast-offs. Now, museum curator and ex-cosmonaut Sergei Krikalyov keeps a vigil over the last of his remaining relics. Most of the museum's spacecraft have been sold to overseas buyers.
Ну, отношение, безусловно, двойственное. С одной стороны, экономика заставляет думать об эффективном использовании площадей, они не должны простаивать. Ну и вместе с тем, они, конечно, немножечко, как вы видите, интерьер космической экспозиции чуть-чуть смазывают. Очень много экспонатов экспонируются у нас за рубежом. В Соединенных Штатах, в Австрии были частичные экспонаты. Но мы говорим сейчас, чтобы посмотреть нашу космонавтику, надо ехать за рубеж.
Not many Gagarin worshippers come to pay their respects here anymore. They renamed his hometown after its most famous son 30 years ago. But it seems Gagarin doesn't have the pull of Graceland or Penny Lane in the 1990s. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, we were the only visitors to the tidy shrine they've assembled round his house.
Yuri was 7 years old when the Hittites overran Smolensk region. The family left this devastated village and moved to Gzhatsk. They lived under this roof frugally, as all people lived in those grim years. Yuri, the son of a collective farmer, decided to enter a trade school.
А после войны, в 1947 году, семья Гагариных перевозит сюда свой дом и устанавливает его вот на этом самом месте, где мы с вами сейчас находимся. Здесь семья Гагариных живет до 1961 года. После полета Юрия Гагарина в космос в 1961 году правительство и городские власти подарили семье Гагариных следующий дом, который находится по ту сторону улицы.
It's just a quarter of a century since Yuri Gagarin died in a plane crash, but his car is still displayed in its casket.
Звезды в степи вновь зацветут незнакомым огнем. Где-то вдали в чутком молчании спит космодром. Новые люди придут, только друга не вернем. Звезды падут.
And the other relics of the Gagarin cult are preserved with the respect due to a secular saint.
Мы снова вспомним о нем, о ласковом друге своем. Вспомним звездный причал и учебный штурвал, как нас Юра в полет провожал. Юра в полет провожал.
For almost 5,000 orbits, Sergei Krikalyov stayed remote from the world's continuing story. Hostages were released, apartheid was dismantled in South Africa, and 70 years of communism ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. As the months piled up, Sergei Krikalyov endured a regular series of emotional partings with his visitors.
Так, я хотел бы обнять нашу прекрасную землю. Ich würde am liebsten jetzt unsere Erde umarmen. И по-английски, I would like just to hug now our wonderful Earth, the wonderful planet, to see from cosmos. Bye bye.
Bizim 20 TD'mi biz aynalayıq, aymalayıq. Hamam sağ olayıq.
До встречи, до свидания.
Да, счастливо.
Толя, Франц, Токтар, это телевидение. Спасибо вам, ребята, за отличную работу и счастливого вам путешествия.
Так, ну что, отключаем телевидение, да?
At last, on March the 25th, 1992, after 10 months in space, Krikalyov was able to say his own goodbyes, reprieved by a German cosmonaut and German money.
А тут вдруг нормальный земной воздух. Обычное наше солнце, потому что когда солнце заглядывало нам в иллюминатор, это было такое раскаленное, жгучее буквально солнце. И вот снег. Тогда было еще достаточно холодно. Нам повезло, что была хорошая погода, и был снег, в который проваливались люди, которые помогали нам перемещаться. Это было все очень приятно, что мы вот, наконец, несмотря на ту тяжесть, которая навалилась на нас, но психологически это было, наоборот, нагрузка снялась, и было какой-то вот момент такой, может быть, даже не эйфория, но это было очень приятно.
Now we live in a different reality. I think that the perception of normal people here is just forget it. All right, yes, we had the first man in space, it was great, but so what? In this new reality, there's simply no space for space. I mean, everything is very much down to earth now.
Вам известно имя Сергея Крикалева? Вы знаете, кто?
Нет, не знаю.
Сергей Крикалев. Вы знаете, кто?
Нет, не знаю.
Крикалев, вот вы знаете, слышал, но нет, не знаю.
Нет, мы не знаем.
Слышал, но сути не знаю. Имя слышал, но...
Ну, а что касается того, что не знают моего имени, меня это, честно говоря, мало заботило. В некоторых случаях это даже удобно. Я думаю, тяжело жить человеку, которому нельзя пройти по улице, на которого все обращают внимание. То есть меня вполне устраивает вот такая ситуация.
Больше нет никого.
В принципе, на свою зарплату я сейчас могу купить меньше, чем мог купить раньше. Хотя и зарплата выросла, но цены растут быстрее, чем зарплата. И большинство населения сейчас находится в таких условиях, и поэтому, в принципе, космонавты, может быть, находятся не на самой нижней грани, но, тем не менее, у всего населения зарплата сейчас растет медленнее, чем цены. Поэтому, так сказать, это общая тенденция. Мы в этом смысле так же, как обычные люди.
Now we are short of sausages, and for us the most interesting is for our people is poltergeist, UFO, and the life after the death. I guess that in some years we will have enough sausages, and the people will have once more interesting in space.
Cosmos has stopped to interest people. Not only cosmos, not only space, but we'll take art, for example, art, theaters. Well, people don't go to theaters any longer. They must think how to support their families. Well, many things have stopped to interest people, not only space flights. And then people think that space flights are very expensive. And so this influences the people's minds too. Of course, it is not prestigious any longer. But what can we do? What can we do?
Today, cosmonauts earn less than taxi drivers, and their once heroic trade has been racked by strikes and violence. But Sergei Krikalyov continues to pursue his space career. In a world that Yuri Gagarin would hardly recognize, the man who was marooned as the last Soviet citizen has found a new way into space, via the American space shuttle. In the last days before he left for America, Krikalyov found time for one final gesture towards the traditions of Soviet space.
I personally think that this is a very funny story, and that he is a real space hero, maybe the second biggest space hero after Yuri Gagarin. But in this country, he's almost unknown.
В полет провожал. Станет светлей, где-то чуть слышно вздохнут камыши. Новых друзей ты поскорей заводить не спеши. Знал не вернувшийся друг эту преданность души. В смутном предчувствии вьюг все шумят камыши. Мы снова вспомним о нем.